So that's the book there, Kickstart Fat Loss, and it's how to transform your body over 40 and reclaim your power. And the reason I started thinking about a book is when I was going on my personal journey, I actually found it really hard to find information for weight loss for women over 40, and particularly around the time of menopause.
Mm.
And so when I was going on my own journey, I spent 2.5 years failing, not getting things right, implementing the wrong strategies, but really trying hard, kind of starving myself, doing tons of cardio, fasting, all sorts of things, all sorts of techniques that didn't work. And so what I thought to myself is I want to show women what does work, and that's
Mm.
what I've put together in this book. It's just gone through a real kind of step-by-step process. So it's not a diet book. There is a diet and a meal plan. Actually, I don't like to call them diets. I like to call it a nutrition guide, because I think you want to have a guide for the rest of your life, not go on a diet. Those of you that know me will know this. Don't go on a diet. Actually eat in a certain way for the rest of your life that's sustainable. But there is a guide on how to eat. There is a guide on how to exercise. But more importantly, it's how to work with your hormones, not
Yeah.
against them.
Well,
So I
and
don't
that's
know.
what I wanna ask about that, because one of the things in the title of the book is that phrase after 40. So what's different? Why is it harder to lose weight after 40? And then where does the hormone piece, because what we're always taught is calories in, calories out, like eat less, work out more. And you really twisted my thinking about that in reading this book of there's so much more to it than just calories in, calories out.
Yeah, so we've been sort of dealt a really hard, difficult hand as females and over 40. And I started to experience this. So I actually had a baby at 41, and I didn't spot that basically I was doing all sorts of things. I think I was doing insanity. Yeah, I definitely was doing insanity. Love that guy, nothing wrong with that. But I was doing all sorts of things. And I thought, I'd also had a baby when I was 19, and the difference in getting back into shape, it was like, try as I might, it just seemed to nothing was really moving the needle. And that's what happens when you're older. A lot of the techniques that you used in your younger days, they're just not going to move the needle. So adding in extra activity, like you said, Angela, being in what's called a calorie deficit. So that's really burning more energy than you're consuming, i.e. food. For women my age, and by the way, I've worked with kind of 10,000 women. 10,000 women have, plus it is now, it's actually more than that, have joined my programs. And so I know, not just from my own personal experience, but working with thousands of women, that approach doesn't work. It doesn't work to just simply drop your calories and increase your activity levels. You need to you need to be really specific about your activity levels, and some activity levels can actually make things worse. So things like tons of endurance training, what happens is your muscles start to sort of wane as you get older. So your muscle mass decreases. And if you do tons of endurance stuff, which was really effective for me, by the way, when I was in my 30s, I was a runner, I did half marathons. And when I implemented it in my 40s, it just didn't work. And I was actually gaining weight running. Gaining weight, and that was soul destroying, because I was doing all this activity, and running's quite hard. You've got to spend a lot of time on it if you're going to enter an event like that. And so not kind of seeing any fat loss and gaining weight, because actually you get hungrier, because what's happening while you're doing all this endurance training is your muscle mass is depleting. And you
Mm.
cannot afford to lose muscle when you get to a certain age being over 40, and it will be even more so if you're kind of in your 50s and 60s. You can't afford to lose muscle, so you need to be spending the time building it up. Why? Because muscle is the thing that's going to burn fat. So the more muscle you have on the body, the more your body's going to naturally burn calories just when you're sat around. So I've done a massive leg session, and today I can monitor it in my watch and think, oh yes, I've burnt 300 calories or whatever it is in that leg session. That's not important. It's what it does to your body all of the time in between
Mm.
that lifting. That's really important. So that's just one example that I tend to talk about a lot. Is actually, I was in the hair salon yesterday because I badly needed a haircut for this call.
Yes.
And I thought, I can't go with this terrible hair that looks like a rat's nest or something like that. So I've got to get my hair cut. And I was talking to the lady in the salon about what I do, because she's a similar age. And she said, well, Melissa, wouldn't you just end up putting muscle on if you get to a certain, if
I
you're
think people get
lifting
really
weights?
afraid about that.
Yeah, she said,
Yeah.
wouldn't you put on muscle? I said, no, you're just putting back what you had in your younger days, what you had in your 20s and 30s. So yes, someone like me, I'm quite muscular, but I've worked really hard over 7 years, and I compete in bodybuilding shows. So my physique is sort of on the extreme end, but for most women, it's just putting back what you've lost through the aging process. So you should never fear it. But of course, you've got to combine that with the right nutrition as well. And so that's where you get into, well, if you just drop your calories, so especially if you do really extreme dieting, like extreme fasting, or just very low calories, like 1,000 calories or
Yeah.
less, what's going to happen is you're going to lose muscle mass. And
And that's the
again,
last thing
you
that we can
don't want to
actually
lose
avoid,
muscle
right?
mass. You want to be putting it on. And so your nutrition needs to support building muscle. So I sort of say to women, well, you need to be eating roughly a gram of protein per pound in your body weight. And they're like, whoa, that doesn't, on the World Health Organization website, it doesn't say that. It says a lot less. And I'm like, but they're not talking about women over 40. They're talking about the general population. But women over 40, and doctors are actually acknowledging this now, actually we need to eat more protein so that we build and retain muscle mass. And it's not just going to be good for weight loss, it's going to be good for our overall health, our mobility, things like preventing heart disease, type 2 diabetes. The method that I recommend will really set you up for life, for like actually giving you longevity, not only a slim body, but giving you longevity for the rest of your life. Because using that approach that people like Arnold Schwarzenegger use, but we just use that approach, but we don't take the performance enhancing drugs because those are bad for your health. You just do it completely naturally. That's actually going to give you longevity. And there's lots of studies. This has happened beyond when I started what I'm doing. The studies are coming out more recently showing that this approach is actually going to give you longevity and better health. We have to sort of think about things like type 2 diabetes. So when we get to 40, this is another thing that's covered in the book, we're much more prone to insulin resistant. So what
Mm.
does that mean? I'm afraid it means cutting down on sugar, because our bodies react much more strongly to sugar than it did in our
All
younger
right,
days.
before we get into sugar, I want to go back to protein for a second. Lots of people talking about it in the chat. What are 1 or 2 tips you might give about getting more protein in?
So yeah, the thing about thinking about protein, so that's a really good question, because I said, a gram of protein per pound in body weight. And for most people, they're like, well, I don't know what that means. What it means is getting protein in at every single meal and snack, Angela. So rather than, you might sort of think, I'm going to snack on, perhaps in the UK, we talk about biscuits, but cookies or a pastry or something like that, or even a piece of fruit. What you want to snack on is something like Greek yogurt or a
Mm.
protein shake, and that's covered in the book. So there's a whole section of recipes in the book that are high in protein, and some of them are snacks and some of them are meals. And every time you have a meal, so even if I eat out, I've just come back from the US where I was kind of, traveling and eating out. Every time I eat out, I look at the menu or where I'm going to buy the food, and I'm looking, where's the protein? So it's going to
Yeah.
be chicken, fish, eggs, tofu, beans, lentils. I'm always looking for the protein, or as I said, Greek yogurt. Cottage cheese is getting really popular now, viral cottage cheese. There's all sorts of recipes online. So you just want to make sure. So if you're eating, say, 3 meals a day and a snack, all of those should contain protein. And to be honest, if you take that approach, before you're even thinking about maybe weighing and measuring your food, that's going to make a huge difference. It's going to make you feel satisfied. So that's the other thing about
Well, and
protein.
I
It's
feel like if you're thinking about protein, you don't even have to really think about how to cut out the sugar because you're eating protein. You won't even want the sugar as much because it's sort of empty calories, right?
Yeah, so the women on my program will say, and they're featured in this book as well. Lots of women that have done my program, and they've kind of had success with it. And there's in some of the chapters, there's a sort of story behind them. They'll often say, Melissa, I'm really full. I can't eat anything else. I'm really full, because the protein keeps you satisfied. So not only is it building and helping you retain muscle, it's keeping you satiated. So you're much less likely to snack on things like sugar, pastry, processed foods, which we want to be avoiding, because also they're quite bad for our hormone health at this stage in life.
Mm.
So things like refined sugar and sort of processed foods, they can really make your hormones go off and out of kilter a little bit more. So you want to be keeping those down to a minimum. Processed, I'm talking about ultra processed foods, really, because most food that we buy has a certain amount of processing in, but we want to avoid ultra processed foods. So that's like chips in
I don't know
America,
if you read the
crisps.
book. I don't know if you read the book Ultra Processed People, but I love
Yeah.
their definition of ultra processed food. They say all you have to do is ask one question. Is the food that you are about to eat, was it made primarily for love or primarily for money? And if it's a big company that is manufacturing food, it is probably more processed than you need. And if it's something you made or your partner made or your mom made or your kid made, and they made it with love, is probably not ultra processed.
So that is a great way
I
of
loved
thinking
that
about
rule.
it.
I loved that rule. I
Yes.
was like, oh, wow, that really takes you, that's super simple.
Yeah,
Um,
super simple. Yeah.
so many women in the chat are saying they have done the 6 week shred or they're doing the 6 week shred. You mentioned that in the book, you talk about some of your clients, and I loved reading those stories. That was one of the roles I got to play in this book, was reading all of those case studies. What are some of your favorite success? And they don't have to be amazing, but what are some of the stories
Yeah.
that keep you
So one
going,
of
waking up in the morning?
so one of the ladies, she actually did the 8-week challenge, and I was really gutted because she didn't win, but she came really close. Her name's Elsie, and she's featured in the book. And one of the things she did was she quit alcohol. And, I'm not anti-alcohol. I've had my own difficult relationship with alcohol over the years. And so I'm pretty open about that. I don't drink at all anymore. But one of the things is I recommend for menopausal women in particular, maybe if you're in perimenopause or menopause or even postmenopause, is you cut right down on alcohol. And for her, that was really difficult because she was drinking every night. And when you saw the before and after pictures, they're not in the book, but it was just incredible. She lost. So one of the problems we have as women over 40 is this belly fat. I'd love to know in the chat if you've experienced that. I've definitely experienced belly fat. And try as you might, you couldn't get rid of it. And this was just a classic example of following my method, quitting alcohol, doing the lifting, doing the nutrition. She looked, but also she felt a whole lot better at the end of the experience. So it's quite typical of what women report. But she was actually feeling on top of the world. She wore this bikini. She could go on vacation in this bikini, and her daughter was sort of commenting on how good she looked. And she couldn't have in a million years dreamt of wearing a bikini. And that was just in 8 weeks. In
Yeah.
8 weeks of following this process that I outline in the book, you know, she was getting an amazing result. And, you know, there's a few of them in the book. It's quite hard to pick them out, to be honest with you.
And I know with the 6-week shred, that's something people can do anytime, but the 8-week challenge is if people are interested in that, and you mentioned winning. So I want you to talk about the structure of that because it's really exciting.
Yeah, so the 8-week challenge, it was sort of something that I was really passionate about doing because last year we started it in January because I noticed that a lot of other fitness gurus were running challenges but not doing them specifically for women over 40. And we've just discussed that we've actually got a massive disadvantage. I know because I've competed in bodybuilding shows, so I've done bikini competitions. I've done about 5. We're at a distinct advantage because why? Because it's harder to lose fat and it's harder to build muscle. So when other influencers were running these competitions, I thought, well, that's pretty unfair because if you're 40, and I had a female client at the time that was doing one and she entered it and I coached her through the process. I said, it's pretty unfair because they're not the young person that's winning and not going to be on the same level as you. It's much more difficult, much more challenging. So that's when I made up my mind last year. I thought I'm going to run these challenges myself. And we wanted it to be short because I think, you know, you might lose interest after 90 days. So we thought
Yeah.
we'll do it for 60 days because, you know, 60 days is also, as it happens, the time that it, on average, it takes to form a habit. So
Mm.
you want people to get into it and then form these really great habits. So we started those in January and it just really took off and the women were getting amazing success. We now offer $20,000 as the top prize. We haven't completed all the ones in 2024. There's still some women going through the challenges, but we're not doing any more. The next one will be in January if you're interested.
How do
So
people, just so they know if they're not on your list, how to get, because there's a lot of people in the chat
yes,
saying,
we
how can I
we
get
do.
notified?
Yeah, so if Melinda, if you could put the registration link in the chat, that would be really great. You can't register yet. Well, you can register your interest, sorry. So you can
Sure.
you just put your name and your email address, and then I'll send you an email when the doors open, which will be towards the end of December for January. And of course, January's a great time, isn't it, to take part in something like that. That was when we ran the first one, was in January 2024. So if you're looking for sort of something where you're sort of thinking, I want that extra impetus, you go in with a community of women. So it's a bit like a Facebook group, but it's our own community on our app. And you can talk to the other women. You're going through the process at the same time. So you're having the same sorts of challenges. And then you can ask us questions. You know, we get lots of questions about the exercise, the people even photograph something they're buying in a store to get our take on whether it's okay to eat it, down
Well,
to the
I even see
minutiae of that.
here in the chat how much support your community is giving each other. There's so many questions that are for you that other people in the community are asking because they've obviously been following you a long time. And I think something, you know, like weight loss, or even just like, I'm going to focus on my health for the first 8 weeks of the year or whatever, that is something where community is going to keep you going. And so
Yeah, it's really important to have support from your peers. Because the thing about it is we're all women at a very similar stage in life that have similar challenges. So like one of them is extreme fatigue. And I talk about that in the book. And, you know, on my YouTube channel, I talk about we can't work out 7 days a week. It's not healthy for us. We want to be scaling that back, you know, maximum 5, even 6 times a week, but we definitely want at least one rest day per week. And by the way, I probably work out 4 or 5 times a week. So some people think, oh, Melissa must work out every day. It's actually not good for you when you get to this stage of life. Sometimes less is more. Sometimes you need to listen to your body. We're kind of more prone to injury and that sort of thing. So we have to kind of look after ourselves. And sometimes you can find if you're overtraining, you'll pick up viruses more. You
Mm.
might, and I cover this quite extensively in the book, you can pick up viruses more and you can get injuries. So there's a sort of like middle ground, if you like, where you don't want to be doing something really extreme, but of course you don't want to be sedentary. You want to be somewhere in between that. And so that's really important to recognize with women at this stage in life, that you don't want to be doing too much. How do I know that? Because I did too much. I overtrained and I made myself sick, and I really took a long time to recover, and then my energy levels just took a real nosedive because of it. So we have to have that balance in our life where we're not doing too much, because we want to, and the 8-week challenge is about as extreme as you'd want to go. We're not doing so much that we're actually making ourselves sick and putting ourselves back